Okay, good afternoon once again. So time to go. Okay, so as I think we've learned over the past few courses, we all understand the crucial role that Parliament plays. And one of the key things we'll be looking at is the oversight function. Of course, Parliament, they play the legislative function, which is the lawmaking. They play the financial function as well. And that mandate is exercised over approval of budget, taxes, even some loans. They play the representative role as well and the deliberative role. So under the oversight function, which is where accountability comes in most, we'll be looking at their work in the committee level, what they do in Q&A sessions or with ministers, motions, censorship of ministers. And the key mechanisms, as you've mentioned, is looking at questions time with the ministers in charge of various sectors. They scrutinize government spending and contracts, loans, taxes, as I've mentioned. People actually also report, are free to send petitions and report issues to Parliament for Parliament to hold government to account. And that is done by the investigative department. And also, they actually pass laws to hold government to account. But in doing this as a way of introduction, it's not always plain sailing. They have challenges, and we'll come to that when we get there. Please feel free, if you have a question or contribution, just raise your hand and I'll call you out so that this session is not just one way. I would rather prefer that it's two-way and I get input from your end. So when we talk about accountability, what do we mean? So basically, it's in my own way, is the obligation of duty bearers to take responsibility. That's the key word, take responsibility for their actions and decisions. And this is the fundamental principle that ensures transparency, fairness, integrity in the functions of government. So it also behoves ensuring that public institutions, they are answerable to their actions and decisions. And Parliament does this by overseeing the actions of the executive, scrutinizing legislation, and representing the interest of the public. Gilbert, are you on? Can I find out up from the French end whether we are getting translations for the French? Anyone French? Are you getting translation? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but I'm not French.
Okay. I just wanted to find out whether my speed is okay for the French people. If we're not hearing anything, then we can carry on. So as I said, Parliament
for us, English, we are good. I don't know about the French.
All right then, okay. Parliament plays a vital role in ensuring accountability by overseeing the actions of the executive, and they scrutinize legislation that papers that are laid before them, policies that come to them at committee level, they scrutinize and investigate them. And at the end of the day, they represent the interest of the public through their accountability work. So as I mentioned, it comprises a lot of key components. We have transparency, we have responsiveness, we have integrity and adherence to the rule of law. Transparency actually refers to making sure that government information is accessible and usable and is readily available for citizens. I always say that without transparency, accountability is very difficult. Because if you don't know something, you cannot scrutinize it or you cannot demand accountability of it. So the first level of accountability for me is transparency. The availability of government information, the public knowing what citizens are doing, and also Parliament knowing what public knowing what government is doing, and Parliament also knowing what government is about. And this is all through transparency, access to information. It's very, very crucial. And responsiveness is the willingness of the public officials to respond or address the needs of the people or the concerns of the people. So in current times, we say that the civic spaces is shrinking. So responsiveness also requires that either parliament or government makes platforms and avenues available for people to bring their concerns or feedback so that they can respond to them. When those platforms are not available, then there will be no feedback for government to respond to. So the first level is that we as journalists and media need to guide, or guard the spaces where people are able to express themselves, freely. So demonstration, you find that in most of our governments now, it's very difficult for people to, be allowed to go on the street to, share their grievances for government to respond. We also need to advocate for online platforms that are able to receive citizens' feedback for governments to respond to them. And then we have the integrity and rule of law, which means that there should be standards, there should be fairness in the way that we do our accountability work. Sorry about that. So that's the key components of accountability. Basically, we need to have transparency, we need to have responsiveness, we have to have integrity, and there should be the rule of law to make sure that the accountability environment is able to play a proper function. So we have other systems that we have in our parliament, which determine the level of accountability. So as you all know, especially in the English speaking countries or colonized by the UK, we adopt the Westminster approach or system. When we go to Nigeria, you have the federal system mixed with the Westminster as well. And all this determine, which level of accountability that you have. At certain level, accountability is done at the federal parliament or regional parliament. At other levels also, depending on the system that you have, then you do it mainly at the national parliament or the Westminster style approach. So during my research for this presentation, I actually thought that we had only 3 regional parliaments, but we do have 6 regional parliaments. So of course, the leading one is the Pan-African Parliament. Then we have the East African Legislative Assembly. We have the ECOWAS Parliament for West Africa. We have the Interparliamentary Union of Intergovernmental Authority on Development. This is basically around the Horn of Africa, and it came about to look at issues of drought and famine and things that are peculiar to the Horn of Africa or East Africa. Then we have the Southern Africa one, and then we have the Central African Parliament as well. Their powers mainly is advisory and consultative, but they do actually receive petitions from nationals within their regional blocks to investigate issues for them. That mostly has to do with human rights, conflict issues, and even economic. People are not able to get what they want from their national parliament. They're able to go into this regional parliament and hold their representatives there accountable, especially if they have any linkages with AFTA or AU policies. All this can be petitioned at that level. It's the same with the other regional parliaments as well. But their powers really rest with advisory and consultative, in terms of how member states, deal with the accountability issues. So similar to national parliaments, regional parliaments often establish committees who, specialize in specific policy areas, and they conduct in-depth interviews, reviews, scrutinize legislation, and make recommendations to the full parliament. And most of the things that they do, they make sure that it aligns with the regional blocs policies of integration or the African-wide policies we have. So for instance, if it has to do with climate change, what is the whole African body adaptation or sustainability levels like? And then it devolves into the other parliaments. So they do citizen engagement, where they actually also do public participation with issues. They set up ombudsman and human rights institutions to do with human rights issues. People actually send petitions and submissions of appeal for them to decide on them for them. And they do questioning and interpellations. So interpellations is actually giving recommendations on how things should be within member states. I'm running very fast because of time, but if you have a question, please do raise your hand or put it in the chat, please. So the key thing for us to look at now is the parliamentary committee. And you find that in most parliaments, the bulk of the work is actually done at the committee level. Here in Ghana, I'm speaking from Ghana, most of the time you have parliamentarians being accused that they are very quiet on the plenary or on the main floor of parliament. And they will tell you that no, they do most of their work in committee level. And it's actually very true. And at the committee level, they are able to do further investigations, scrutinize government actions, policies and expenditure, especially the expenditure, making sure that it aligns with approved budgets. Policies also make sure that the policies actually serve the interests of the people. They also do inquiries. So if there are conflict situation, as happened in Ghana recently, the Parliamentary Committee on Interior had to move to that area to go and do their own investigations and do a report for governments to do a policy to make sure that the conflict is resolved. They examine proposed legislation and then oversee government departments, which is very, very, very key. This is where there are, you have the Public Accounts Committee looking at various government ministries and agencies, their expenditures and how they are implementing contracts and the policies and what have you. So we have various examples of committees in Parliament that deal with accountability functions. And the leading one usually is the Public Accounts Committee, which focuses on public expenditure. We have the Ethics Committee, and in Ghana we have the Government Assurances Committee, which looks at all assurances the government makes on the floor of Parliament. So Sector Minister comes on the floor of Parliament, tells us that by the end of 2023, 10 hospitals will be built across the country. So this committee, as soon as this announcement is made, will start monitoring how government is, going to fulfill this assurance. They start looking at contracts, they start looking at implementation, quality of work, and then summon sector ministers to public hearing if they find that there's a deviation, in the contracts that they signed already. So these are some of the things that the committee does in Parliament. And it's very, very, very crucial, the way that they do. And most of the time, it's easier to petition committees to hold government to account than actually going to the speaker, for instance, or going to the plenary. So functions of parliamentary committee. So as we mentioned already, they do in-depth examination of legislation, policy development. They are very, very much involved. And in our part of the world, because of this policy development, a lot of the MPs actually lobby for QC committees. So, committee on trade, for instance, committee on foreign affairs. And during this policy development, they get taken away to outside the capital to very posh resorts, and then pay very good money sometimes, to do this policy development. But it's very, very crucial because then they are able to bring in the aspirations of the people they serve into policies and make sure that the policy that is finally delivered serves the needs of the citizens. They scrutinize government action as well. So, this can happen after the event. They can call the sector minister who was in charge of that particular action to come and respond to issues. So in recent times, there was a by-election in Ghana, and the military, a paramilitary group went to cause, mayhem. Parliament was actually, taxed and, summoned the Minister for Interior, Minister for Defense, to come and respond to how this paramilitary group were able to put the powers in their own hands and cause the mayhem that they did. so they scrutinize whatever actions the government does. And this is a very key way of holding government to account, to know that at the end of the day, there's somebody out there that, checks and balances their actions. This oversight of government departments and agencies, as we mentioned with the Public Accounts Committee, this looks at local government, looks at the agencies, their expenditures, their projects, and make sure that they align with what was approved by Parliament in terms of, especially if it's linked to loans and taxes, for instance. And then they examine public accounts, they conduct inquiries and investigations, and they do public consultations a lot. I was from time ago invited to be part of, looking at the Freedom of Information Law in Ghana, and we looked at it line by line, clause by clause, to make sure that, the legislation is fit for purpose and, is able to do what it's meant for. And then they do monitoring of implementation. As I mentioned, with the Government Assurances Committee, I'm very interested to know, it's a committee that I've worked with since 2014. And then during our discussion, I'd very much like to know whether you have such or a similar committee in your country. So Government Assurance Committee basically monitors all government assurances. And assurances, I just like to chip in that they're different from mere promises. Assurances usually have timelines, and they have budgetary or monetary allocation to it. So Parliament is able to know that by the end of a particular time frame, an assurance needs to be delivered. It has money to make sure that the assurance is delivered as well, and basically they're able to track and follow the money to make sure that it's being used to do whatever it's meant for. And then during confirmation hearings as well, it's also a very good avenue for holding a government to account. So these are people that government is appointing to various ministerial positions or agencies, and through them, Parliament is able to ask questions related to government plans or manifesto promises or assurances. They are able to do this through confirmation hearings, to hold government to account as well. So what are some of the tools that are used? So it's questioning and debate time, committee level, which we've looked extensively now. They have the power of votes of either confidence or no confidence. Budget approval. Ghana is going through a very thorny situation at the moment with this budget approval. Things that needs to be in there and things that shouldn't be in there, and how they go around approving it. They can also appoint ombudsmen and auditors to investigate issues. They undertake public hearings, and then also they use the Freedom of Information laws to hold government to account. So after Ghana's last elections, for instance, the Freedom of Information law was used to find out how much the Electoral Commission spent on the whole entire budget. The Freedom of Information law is also used to get information from various departments and the ministries to find out how allocated monies are being used. And of course they do constituency work, and which is also very, very important. So constituency work is where they actually go and hear from members of their constituency about issues to do with accountability, issues to do with government policy. So if, for instance, there's a social protection policy to give food to public schools, which we have, we call it the Ghana School Feeding Program, which is meant to give free food for kids in public schools. And when the parliamentarians get to go to do this constituency work, they get to hear from their own constituency members or ordinary citizens about the quality of this food, for instance, or the quality of any policy. And based on that, or what they hear, it's more as serve as evidence-based information that they can use to hold government to account, or even deliver a question to ministers. And then they do media engagement and media scrutiny. So sometimes they do everything and they don't get responsiveness or are not able to hold government to account. Then they use the media. So media is also another channel that parliamentarians use to hold government to account. And sometimes they use social media like we have currently with the National Cathedral, MPs are not getting, MPs in the minority are not getting that much responsiveness, and there's some of them who are posting things online, from social media to get citizens involved in holding government accounts or asking the relevant questions. Okay, so I think we're doing well for time. Yeah, Gilbert. Hello. Okay, I want to pause. I want to pause here for questions, if there are any, before we go into the group work.
Yeah, Jerry.
Hello.
Any issues?
Yes, I want to find out if there are any questions. If not, then we can go into the group work. I think we are 16, so we can have a group of 4 each, 4 groups. Would that work?
Okay, so you want to invite questions first,
Clement?
right? Yeah, this is Clement.
Oh, hi, Clement. So yes, find out if there are any questions. If there are not any questions, we can go into
the group
work
sessions.
Yes.
Okay. All right, colleagues. It's time for us to ask questions. So far, what Jerry has been discussing with us. If you have any questions, please raise your hand so that we would enable your microphone so that you can ask your questions. Meanwhile, in the meantime, Gilbert will be working the
group. Okay.
The work to ensure that the group is set up. So let's ask.
So mainly, yes. So let's ask questions before we go to the group on the Parliament and accountability. Okay, so I think I did a very good work. There's no question. We know it already. Then we can go into the group, look at examples of processes that our parliament have been used in holding government to account. What are some of the challenges in holding government to account, and then recommendations. Is that a good way to go? Hello?
I think at this point we should be calling names because it appears the place is too dormant. So let's have some of our colleagues respond to some of the questions. The presenter is asking whether everything he has explained so far or has presented to us so far, whether we are okay with it. We are not hearing anything from you. We are not too sure whether you can even hear us. So can we know if you can hear us or if you have any issues? Let's hear you. Jerry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that if not, then we can go into the group and address the group work, which is basically look at examples that their individual parliaments have used in holding government to account, and the challenges that they face, and what are some of the solutions to the challenges in demanding accountability. So that we can come back at 1 o'clock.
Okay. So, what question are we using for the group work, for instance? Well,
the question is that amongst themselves they discuss examples of any of the processes that their in-country parliament use in holding government to account, the challenges that they face, and then they give us a recommendation on how to overcome the challenges.
Okay. What their in-country parliament uses to hold the government to account.
Yeah.
What tools
do they use? Yeah.
In-country parliament use to hold government to account.
The challenges that they face.
Okay.
And the recommendations to overcome the challenges. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. So, colleagues, you have heard the question as well. Now, Jerry, I'm not too sure people can hear us because there's no feedback from any of them. Can you hear us?
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. It was very interesting in our group. I think what we'll do is that we'll give each group 5 minutes. So Big Governors, we have 4 groups, right?
Jerry, are you talking to me?
Yes, I thought we have 4 or 5 groups. 4.
No, we only created 2.
Oh, is it 2 groups? Okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay then.
Yeah.
All right. So group 1 can take 5 minutes and a bit to present, the outcome of the discussion, which is basically we looked at tools that parliaments in our various countries use to hold government to account. And then the second one is the challenges that they face in holding the government to account. And the last one is the recommendations to overcome some of these challenges. So the floor is open. Group 1, can you present yours, please?
Thank you very much, Jerry. Presenting for Group 1, we looked at the tools and we picked a few, which the first one was question time, that Parliament uses questions to the executive in relation to trying to find out issues of accountability. And this sometimes can spill to the committee where an issue is investigated in depth by the committee, who in turn do their probe and investigations and even call the people, officials of government before them and file a report, which is also presented at the plenary and discussed. And that is another way. The other way is through summons. Perhaps there's an issue that raises the issues of accountability in a particular ministry, and Parliament has power to summon, and it uses this tool to summon the respective cabinet secretary or minister before it, sometimes before the committee and sometimes before the whole house in relation to whatever issue it is. And so Parliament has power also to use censure to hold government to account. It can censure a minister or the government itself in relation to a certain issue if perhaps it feels that it has been ignored when it pursues the other earlier tools that I mentioned. And the other is through impeachment or sometimes their own investigations into a matter. And these are tools that Parliament has at its disposal. And there's also the issue of using petitions from the public to follow up to conclusion, to find out a matter that has been raised before it on behalf of the public. And it also scrutinizes reports like that of the public accounts, the Auditor General. And it also holds government into account through the vetting process. It vets the appointment of ministers to cabinet, looking at their history and their track record to see if they fit office. And Parliament also uses its oversight role to hold government to account. The challenges Parliament face when doing all this and using all these tools are sometimes that government officials fail to honor summons. The other challenge is the lack of power to sanction. And the other one is corruption and bribery. Sometimes we have seen examples where censure motions have been used to solicit money from the executive. And so these tools sometimes have been abused, they have not been used as required, so that to promote transparency and also hold government to account, but they've been abused by some parliaments or MPs, members of parliament, who have used it to solicit money from those targeted for censure. The other challenge is unavailability of information, lack of access to this information, and also delay in releasing timely reports from the Auditor General, such that you find by the time some reports are released, there's a new parliament or a new parliament in transition. So following up and making sure that those who abused office during their tenure are held to account sometimes becomes a challenge. We also found out that sometimes members of parliament and also the government are not well equipped enough to take up or to probe issues as is required. The example is of perhaps a minister is been asked to respond to a matter. When follow-up questions are raised, they cannot really respond to those questions, and they seek for more time, and they go, and this seeking for more time sometimes makes the issue just evaporate. So it is one of the challenges facing the parliaments, and that is incompetence sometimes, or not, or lack of preparation, or just a way of filibustering, so that one does not one is not held to account. The recommendations we picked out are perhaps look for legislation that can impose sanctions, strengthen the one which is there, perhaps to have sanctions that can give power to Parliament to be able to really censure those who ignore the summons, or those who just decide not to turn up when they're supposed to answer questions. The other one is to have open data platforms, so that we have all reports of the financial implications from the relevant bodies posted as and when they're ready. The budgetary allocation is posted for transparency, so that the citizenry and even Parliament is able to see and follow up, and also strengthen the freedom of information law that compels timelines for governments to forward information to Parliament. The other one is enhanced training for ministers in Parliament and members of enhanced training for the ministers and also for members of Parliament, especially in budgetary preparation and execution, or anything that involves contracting. I forgot about another challenge which I've seen in my country is the use of judiciary to sometimes stop processes of Parliament when it is seeking to hold government to account. So that is our submission. Thank you very much. And thanks to my team.
Thank you so much, Nelly. Let's go to group 2, please.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot has already been said by group 1 that are also captured in what we have planned out. Let me quickly go to the tools that Parliament can use to hold government to account. For instance, the basic functions of a legislator, its lawmaking, oversight, and of course, representation. And it is very important for the Parliament for them to understand their constitutional rules and ensure that they are completely independent to enable them hold the executive to account. So you have summons, for instance, and they also have warrant of arrest when an impeachment, if a particular agency, head of agency, is invited to appear before a Parliament to give explanations to issues, and when that agency fails to appear, of course, the Parliament has the constitutional responsibility to summon or to issue a warrant of arrest when the agency fails to appear before the Parliament. So there are so many tools stated in each country's constitution that gives the parliament the responsibility or powers to invoke the constitution. So they should always ensure to use this kind of tools or window to ensure that the executive are answerable to them. And the executive, the parliament have to shun completely the grip. They have to lose away from the grip of the executive. Most parliaments in Africa today are being controlled by the executive. Why? What do I mean by this? Because of the majority, the ruling party in power, they want to ensure that the presiding officer are the ones selected by them, the executive, and majority of the parliamentarians comes from the ruling party. And when it is so, it is difficult to hold for the parliamentarians to hold the executive to account, because whatever policies or decisions that are made by the executive, even when they are not acceptable by citizens or are not favorable to citizens and of course the constituents that these parliamentarians tend to represent, their hands are tied, because there are, when these issues are debated and put to vote, of course, because the majority, they say the minority will have their say, but the majority will have their way. So I'm saying this, I'm also mixing the challenges, because these are some of the challenges that the parliamentarians face in trying to call the executive to order. So the executive, the parliamentarians should ensure to use their constitutional powers to be able to call the executive to account. So, like I was saying, some of the challenges they face is the majority of the political party in parliament being in control, which makes it difficult for the opposition party who are in the minority to have their way. It is always the majority, which is in the ruling party, that has their way, because they are being controlled by the executive. So going back to the tools again, we have the Public Accounts Committee, like she said, the public petitions, it's also there. And then committees, the lawmakers have to shun corruption, because most times when these executives are being investigated by parliament, because of what exchange hand, in most cases, it is difficult for the parliament to hold the executive to account. So the executive, the parliament must shun corruption and put their constituents, the country, the citizens first before their own interests. So my recommendation will be that the laws, there are some of these laws that give powers to the parliament are obsolete, and they need to be amended to give the parliament more powers. For instance, when resolutions are made by the parliament, what happens to those resolutions? For instance, in Nigeria, they'll tell you resolutions are mere advisory. They are not binding on the executive. Where a resolution is made that the the executive should take a certain, reverse a decision that has been taken, and then the executive will tell you it's not binding on them because it is not a law. They are just advising them. So some of these things have to be looked into. The parliament should find a way to amend the laws that will give them more powers to hold the executive to account. And then the parliament must utilize their oversight responsibilities or functions judiciously, because I feel that they are not utilizing the function of oversight judiciously, and it gives the executive leeway to do whatever they like. And of course, it is the citizens or the masses that suffer from some of the decisions or policies of the executive. And it's also the responsibility of the parliament to expose corruption. Like in my country, they say the parliament is there to expose corruption, for civil society and citizens to also join in holding the executive to account. But what you see is, like I mentioned earlier, because of the corruption and the fear of, and the tool of the majority, which the ruling party uses to tame or control the parliament, some of these things are not being done. And then there has to be transparency. There is no transparency in most cases, the way the parliament operate. And the parliament, they should also work hand in hand with journalists. There should be training of journalists on the workings of committees, or some of these committees, or how the parliament functions, and so that they will be able to report what exactly is happening to on their various platforms, in order to hold the executive to account, so the parliament can work hand in hand with the with journalists, to be able to expose what the executive is doing that it's not right, that will inhibit progress and development in our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nelly and Elizabeth. So yes, I think that most of the things that you both raised runs across most of the parliaments in our, on our continent. The other thing that came to mind from listening to both of you also has to do with political interference and the power of political parties who wield, significant influence over their members, in the way that if a member of parliament in an incumbent government is doing too much accountability work, or is asked too much questions about how government is performing, the political party that they belong sometimes influence them or put some pressure on them, either through the whip system or through their own means. Some of them are even primaried out, that they are not playing ball. So they are not playing ball because they're asking their government to hold, to provide account of their stewardship. And when it gets to primaries, their own parties primary them out so that they can bring somebody in who can play ball, and all that affects, Parliament's ability to play its accountability functions or role. Is there any question, or is there any addition from anyone? So we can move on and go through recommendations. Is there any additional question? Okay.
Not from me, sir. Carry on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so the main reason why we are going through this exercise is also for our own benefit in holding governments to account, and for us to know that there are these various tools that we can, advocate for members of parliament to deploy in order to hold government to account. And we need to always make sure that these tools are not taken away through either a judicial system, as Nelly rightly said, using the judiciary to delay the work of Parliament, or using laws that are able to use as a lacuna or a loophole to escape accountability. And we, this is basically to build our knowledge base that, yes, for instance, there's a freedom of information law. So if a member of parliament is given an excuse that they don't have access to information, then they can, leverage on the freedom of information law to demand information and hold government to account. So in strengthening accountability mechanisms, obviously involves active participation of the civil society, who will say that they represent the citizens in that level, even active participation of citizens, the presence of an independent judiciary, who are not doing the burden of the incumbent government. Of course, we, the media, also have, a role to play. And, all this is linked to adherence to international standards and best practices. So in advocating for, accountability, we need to push for transparency. We need to make sure that we are demanding that public information is made available and is usable and is made available on time. We also, play an oversight role to make sure that the judiciary ensures that legal standards are upheld. And of course, the media, we need to inform and educate the public about what government is doing, so that, during the time that parliamentarians go to do constituency work, citizens will know that this is an opportunity to demand accountability of them, or send petitions to them to demand accountability of government. So as I mentioned already, I work with an organization called Pen Plus Byte. We are a civic tech organization, and everything that we do, we bring in a bit of technology into our work. And we've been working with Parliament mainly through a project that we call the Connecting Citizens to Parliament. So this is a technology platform that we put a particular committee that we're working with, the Government Assurance Committee. So we basically get all information about the committee's work, their government assurances that they are pursuing. So it has to do with infrastructure, education, health, all those assurances from government. We put it online. We use Twitter, we use social media to get information out, so that citizens get to know what their government is doing with their tax money, what Parliament is also doing in holding government to account, so that they can contribute to it. So this is one of the means that e-government, an online platform for public access, can help Parliament in holding government to account. We also made mention during our group discussion of open data initiatives. So open data initiatives is basically, making sure that government data is freely made available and it's accessible. And so if there's any reports from any department, it's pushed on this open data platform. If there's a budget approval, budget allocations, all those things are put on the platform so that everybody can see it, rather than we demanding it. This actually, requires government to proactively divulge information and put it in this open data platform. There are other tech tools that can be used to promote greater transparency. So there's one that is being used in one of the countries, I think in Lithuania, and it's digital budgetary platform. So this digital budgetary platform is that when the annual budget is approved, the national budget is approved, it is put on this platform. So every expenditure is booked in regards to whatever has been approved. So sitting at your comfort of your home, or the parliamentarian can quickly go on this platform and to see how much during the year government is spending, what are the balances, what project is being used for, and all of that. And this gives real-time information that parliamentarians can use to hold government to account. The other platforms also is whistleblower platforms. So going forward, Parliament can actually add a whistleblower platform to their website, which makes it possible for citizens to anonymously report issues, send petitions, that parliamentarians can have access to firsthand, without any anybody diluting it, and then they can demand accountability from government. And then one other tech platform also is which is being piloted in some certain countries, is the electronic committee management system. So this is various committees have an electronic committee management system, which works like your MAE tools, which are online, that allows committee members to meet online, exchange documents, actually bring sector ministers or government agency representatives to come and answer questions. All this done online. So committee members do not have to be at a physical location to work together, but then use this committee management system to have access to information for the committee members. The committee members can send in questions and demand accountability all through an online platform. And these are some of the ways that technology can help Parliament in holding government to account. The challenges, I think we've mentioned it all. One of the things also, so I will not spend time on the political interference. One of the things also is lack of resources. I don't know whether any of us mentioned lack of resources, but what we find is that most accountability institutions, including committees that do accountability work, are usually under budgeted. So the committee that I mentioned that I work with, the Government Assurance Committee, the reason why me as a civil society, private sector person worked with them was because their budget was woefully inadequate for them to do their work of monitoring government assurances. So I had to go and seek funds from donor agency to be able to take the MPs out to do their own work, which they are mandated to do. But then, government, both two dominant parties that have taken power in Ghana, they intentionally stifle them of funds, so they are not able to do their work. So lack of resources, and even not resources monetary alone, sometimes even resources in terms of technical know-how, understanding contracts, understanding budget. What do they go out, what do they look out for? It's also an issue. And then another one is cultural barriers. So cultural barriers are also put in religious barriers. And this happens a lot during vetting or approval of ministers. So you find that, Parliament will say, no, we are not going to approve this person, or we are sanctioning this body. And all of a sudden, the pastors will start making phone calls. The traditional leaders will start making phone calls. And all of this, interferes with the work of Parliament. Because if my senior pastor calls me, that this person is a relative, or is also a church member or a community member, then it actually interferes with the accountability work, because out of your respect and courtesy to this opinion leader or traditional leader or religious leader, you are not able to do your work effectively. So these are some of the a couple of challenges I wanted to add to all the things that we discussed. So future trends I mentioned already. We have them open data platforms, the electronic committee management systems. We have the public online platforms. But really, what we need to look out for is the innovations in technology. How can AI come in and play a role in basically, even for instance, can we put the whole national budget in an AI platform to give us strength to compare to previous budgets, to see that, in fact, the budgets are allocated to promote good governance, to serve the needs of citizens. Blockchain technology is there. And then also collaborations with other parliaments. So, there's no, hindrance for a committee, say, in Ghana, to go and work with a committee in Kenya to learn about what tools they use, how, those tools have been effective for them. And then come and replicate it in your in-country legislative ways of working. So more to do with technology, more to do with collaboration. So recommendations for strengthening accountability include legislative reforms. So Giverton in our group, for instance, mentioned about legislating to make sure that Parliament has the teeth to bite in terms of ministers who are summoned to Parliament and they ignore the summons. So if we can have legislative reform. Capacity building was also mentioned, Nelly mentioned that, for parliamentarians. So we are talking about all these technology tools can we advocate that they go on training on how these tech tools work, go on training on how budgets are developed and implemented, how policies are developed and implemented. Because sometimes it's not because they don't want to hold government to account, but the know-how, to do this accountability work, they don't have it, so they seem incompetent, but really what they need is training. So capacity building, for them to be able to do this work. And then public awareness campaigns, basically to make sure that citizens know how our government works, and then citizens can actually serve as the eyes of parliament in their various communities or constituencies, and then contribute to parliament work. So we talked about the legal framework, public awareness already as well. I see some chat in the chat. Is there a question? If not, we can move on. So there's traduction. What does that mean? Anyone want to translate? From Amedu. Okay. So like we mentioned already, parliaments play a crucial role in ensuring accountability and governance, in upholding transparency and integrity and the rule of law. For us as media, we need to understand all the tools available to parliament in that when we are doing our stories or we are doing our pieces, we are able to advocate for them to use the tools to demand accountability and for us to better inform our reading or listening in public or watching in public. So all these tools are there. It's also good that we know about the challenges so that we can also work in trying to eliminate some of these challenges so that Parliament is able to do its oversight function, which is the accountability function, effectively. So thank you very much. And here, today, I think the room has been quiet. Is there any questions from anyone or anything, any issue that you want us to discuss? Hello? If not, then I'll hand over to Gilbert or Clement. Okay, Nora. Hello, Nora. Yeah.
Nelly. Yeah, thank you so much.
Nelly, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm just following up from what we submitted and also the other group in relation to the powerlessness sometimes of parliaments. Like I remember the other group said in their country, resolutions are just mere paper. They are just that. How do we go about this to make parliaments resolutions across Africa be considered by their parliaments, respective parliaments, as something that is binding?
Thank you for your question. So before I respond, I think I will go to the members on the call, if anybody has any idea.
Yes, I know I made that was one of my recommendations, and I said the parliament has the powers to amend the laws to make their resolutions bite instead of backing alone. Their resolutions should be able to bite. So some of those laws that needs to be amended across African parliament, they should be able to make those laws that will hold the executive to account. But before I drop, my comment will be that, well done. Thank you very much. I enjoyed your lecture. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So Nelly. So I also had a similar response that Parliament itself, as they say, is the master of their own work. And for them to be able to have that teeth to bite, then they should, make those resolutions binding, and then they should be given the teeth to actually sanction, any official that is not responding to their summons or to their petitions or what have you. But if you give him the teeth, some of them also have the teeth, but it's just a political will to go full steam on the powers that they have. But then also it's the issue of collaboration and coordination amongst, usually we have the minority and the majority side. And it's about getting them to come and agree together that this is the powers that we have and we must use it. But with, in the absence of such powers, then they have to, develop a resolution to say that, okay, if we summon somebody, we have a resolution, we have anything on paper, then it's as binding as it is, and we can have the power of impeachment, which, I haven't heard any African country actually impeach any leader before. But then, yes, these are the things that, they can use to make sure that they are effective. Making sure that the resolutions have the teeth to bite, either through recommending, sanctions of censure or dismissal or impeachment. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you too very much.
Is there any contribution or question? If not, then we'll hand over to Gilbert or Clement.
All right. Thank you very much, Jerry, for taking us through this very important topic. I have been educated and I have learned a lot. And I'm sure that my colleagues here have also learned a lot. Just that we would have expected a lot of our colleagues to contribute in the discussion level. But be that as it may, it looks like, Jerry, you're a very good presenter and a good teacher.
I take it, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So when you teach, your students do not have a lot of questions because you break it down. So we thank you so much. We thank our colleagues as well for being part of the show. This is our 5th edition, leaving one more lap to go next week. And we entreat you to come in your numbers so that next week we continue and finish well. On this note, if there's no other question, engagement, or any clarification, then I think it's the right time for us to call it quits. It's just 2 minutes to 2 p.m. and we are right on time. So thank you so much for being part of the program.
Thank you so much, Clement, for having us. And I'm grateful for the audience. Thank you so much. Let's all enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.